I had always trusted my wife. Our relationship had its ups and downs, like any marriage, but I never once questioned her loyalty. I worked long hours as a project manager at a tech company, hoping to provide a better life for us. I was proud of the work I did, but it meant I spent a lot of time away from home, especially during important deadlines. One night, I came home earlier than usual, thinking I'd surprise her with a romantic dinner. As I walked through the front door, something felt off. The house was quiet, too quiet. The lights were dim, and the usual hum of the television or music wasn't there. I called out for her, but there was no response. I assumed she was upstairs, so I went up to our bedroom. The sight I walked in on was enough to shatter everything. There, on our bed, was my wife, tangled in the sheets, but she wasn't alone. Another man was there, a stranger I didn't recognize. My heart dropped into my stomach as I realized what I was witnessing. I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process what was happening. My wife quickly scrambled to cover herself, her face turning pale when she saw me. The man, equally flustered, jumped off the bed and scrambled to gather his clothes. I didn't say a word. I just turned around and walked out of the house, numb with disbelief. That night, my mind raced with questions. Was this the first time? Had it been going on for months? The next day, when I confronted her, she was full of excuses. She claimed it was a one-time mistake, a moment of weakness, and begged for forgiveness. But deep down, I knew it was much worse than that. Over the next few weeks, I began to uncover the truth. I hired a private investigator who revealed that my wife had been seeing not just one, but 5 different men while I was away at work. They ranged from coworkers to old friends, even a neighbor. Each of them had spent intimate time with her during the hours I would normally be working, all while I trusted her to be faithful. The worst part was how she manipulated me, lying and convincing me that everything was fine. She kept up the facade of the perfect wife, while secretly living a double life. When I confronted her with everything I knew, she broke down, apologizing and saying how much she regretted her actions. But the damage was done. Trust had been shattered beyond repair. In the end, I left. I couldn't stay with someone who had betrayed me so deeply. The realization that my wife, the person I thought I knew and loved, had been unfaithful with so many men while I was just trying to provide for our family was a pain that still haunts me after I left. Everything felt like a blur. I moved into a small apartment, trying to piece my life back together. My mind often wandered back to the moments we shared, those quiet evenings at home, the vacations we took, the future we had planned. It all seemed so hollow now. How could I have been so blind to what was happening right under my nose? I spent a lot of time reflecting on how everything had unfolded. The feeling of betrayal was suffocating. I had poured so much into our marriage, trusted her completely, and she had taken advantage of that trust in the most painful way. I tried to focus on my work, but even that felt different. How could I care about deadlines and projects when the foundation of my personal life had been torn apart? In the months that followed, I tried to move on, but the scars ran deep. I tried dating again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that every woman I met would eventually betray me, just like she had. I would find myself checking their social media accounts or looking for signs of deceit. Paranoia had taken root in my mind. Every time I thought I was ready to open my heart again, memories of my wife and her betrayal would come flooding back. I stopped talking to friends and family for a while. They all asked me how I was doing, offering sympathy, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. How do you explain to someone that your entire life was a lie? How do you tell people that the person you trusted the most had shattered everything you believed in? I heard through mutual acquaintances that she had tried to reach out, apologizing and asking if we could talk. She sent me countless messages, telling me she was sorry for everything, that she had made a huge mistake, and that she wanted to work things out. But I couldn't bring myself to respond. There was no going back. The woman I thought I knew had vanished, replaced by someone who was capable of deceiving me in the most cruel way possible. I eventually got into therapy, hoping to make sense of the pain and anger that I carried. It helped slowly. The counselor helped me understand that I wasn't to blame, that her actions were her choice, not mine. That realization was both freeing and heartbreaking. I had done nothing wrong, yet I was left with the wreckage of a relationship that I had invested everything into. I also began to realize that moving forward would mean healing. It wouldn't be easy, but I couldn't let her actions define the rest of my life. Slowly, I started to rebuild myself. I took up new hobbies, made new friends, and began to focus on my own happiness. It took time, but eventually, I started to feel like myself again. I'll never forget the day I received the final message from her. It wasn't an apology this time. Instead, it was a picture of the house we once shared, a final attempt to stir up old feelings. It only reminded me of how much I had lost. But in that moment, I realized I was no longer that person. I wasn't the man who trusted blindly or the husband she had betrayed. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone who had learned the hard way that love isn't always enough. The scars would always be there, but I had finally learned to live with them. And I was okay with that. I was free. As the months passed, I became more comfortable in my own skin. I never imagined I could heal from something so deep, but with time, I did. The weight of the betrayal still lingered, but I started to see it less as a defining moment of my life and more as a chapter one had to close in order to move forward. I started to realize that life wasn't going to wait for me to heal, and if I wanted to be happy again, I had to make that choice for myself. Eventually, I reconnected with some old friends I hadn't spoken to in years. They welcomed me with open arms, and I slowly began to feel like I was part of a world again. I also found solace in therapy, where I worked through the emotional turmoil of my marriage. Each session helped me peel back the layers of pain, anger, and confusion. I learned to forgive myself for not seeing the signs sooner, and to understand that the choices she made had nothing to do with me as a person. I wasn't unworthy of love. I had just been betrayed by someone who couldn't appreciate what we had. I also started to regain some of my trust in people, though it wasn't easy. There were days when I still found myself questioning whether I could ever trust anyone again. It was especially hard when I met new people, women particularly. Each time I felt a connection with someone, the fear of history repeating itself crept in. I'd catch myself waiting for the signs of deception that I had missed the first time around. But one day, I met someone who made me believe in love again. It started slowly, with simple conversations and shared interests. She had no hidden agenda, no baggage, just a kind heart and an honest soul. The way she treated me, open, direct, and caring, was nothing like the games I had been a part of before. At first, I was hesitant, but over time, I realized I wasn't repeating the same mistakes. I had learned how to communicate better, how to set boundaries, and how to trust someone without giving up my sense of self. She knew about my past, and she understood my fears. She didn't pressure me to move faster than I was ready for. Instead, she was patient, allowing me to heal at my own pace. Slowly, I began to see a future again, one that wasn't clouded by the shadows of my ex-wife's betrayals. The scars would always be there, but they no longer held power over me. It wasn't just about love, though. It was about rediscovering who I was outside of the man who had been hurt. I was someone who had grown stronger, someone who had faced the worst kind of betrayal, and come out on the other side with the resolve to never let it define me. I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel whole again. In time, I made peace with what happened. I realized that I couldn't change the past, no matter how much I wished I could. But I had control over my future, and that was where my focus needed to lie. I would never forget the pain she caused me, but I had learned the most important lesson of all, that true happiness comes from within, not from someone else's actions. And so I moved on, not because I had forgotten, but because I had found a way to live without being haunted by the past. I found a new sense of purpose, a new sense of self, and ultimately, I found a kind of love that was built on trust and honesty, something I had long thought was impossible. I was no longer the man who had been betrayed. I was someone stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever came next. As the seasons changed, so did I. The person I had become was someone I didn't recognize at first, but in a good way. I no longer carried the weight of what had happened with my ex-wife. I wasn't defined by the betrayal anymore, nor was I chained to the mistakes of the past. I could see my life with clarity now, the edges of my future no longer shrouded by doubt and resentment. With my new relationship, things felt different. There was no comparison to what I had been through before, but I still carried the lessons. I had learned to communicate better, to be honest about my fears, and to trust again, albeit cautiously. I realized that even though I had been hurt in the worst possible way, I didn't have to shut myself off from the world. I didn't have to close my heart forever. This relationship, though new, had already taught me something incredibly important. Love isn't about perfection. It's about growth, patience, and learning how to navigate life together. I began to recognize that no one is immune to mistakes, but it's how we handle them, how we show up for each other in times of difficulty, that matters most. And with her, I felt like I had found someone who understood that on a deep level. Yet, even with this new chapter, there were moments when the old wounds resurfaced. On occasion, I'd find myself in situations where trust was tested, not in my new relationship, but in the world around me. Whether it was in friendships or at work, I had moments of anxiety, thinking, what if I'm being lied to again? But I no longer let those thoughts control me. I had learned that I couldn't live in fear, and I couldn't assume that everyone would betray me. One evening, after spending a quiet night together, my new partner and I were talking about our lives. The subject of my past came up, and I shared a few more details of what I had gone through. She listened intently, not with pity, but with understanding. I told her how much I had struggled with the idea of trusting again, how much I had questioned whether I could ever truly feel safe in love. She smiled softly and held my hand. "You've been through so much," she said, "but you've also healed so much. And that's why I'm here. Not to replace what you've lost, but to give you something real. Something built on honesty. Something you deserve." Those words stayed with me. They reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. I had someone who was willing to walk through life with me, understanding my fears and helping me face them. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't always be perfect, but it was genuine. It was the kind of love that I had once thought was out of reach. As time went on, I found myself slowly letting go of the lingering anger. The woman who had cheated on me no longer had the power to ruin my happiness. She had taken so much from me, my trust, my security, my belief in love, but she had never taken my ability to rebuild myself. I had done that piece by piece. I no longer felt resentment when I thought about her. Instead, I felt a quiet sense of gratitude. Not for the pain she caused, but for the lessons I had learned. The life I was building now, with honesty and care, was worth far more than the false image of perfection I had once clung to. The final chapter of that painful relationship had closed. I didn't need closure from her. I had already given myself that by choosing to move on. The future felt uncertain, as all futures do, but it no longer felt daunting. I had everything I needed to face whatever came my way, my own strength, my own wisdom, and a love that was truly built on trust. The past no longer defined me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. As I continued to move forward, I began to truly appreciate the simple joys in life. For so long, I had been consumed by pain, betrayal, and mistrust that I forgot how to enjoy the moments that mattered most. I started to notice the beauty in the small things again, the way the sun set over the horizon, the laughter of friends gathering around a table, or even the quiet contentment of waking up next to someone who cared for me without hidden agendas. My new relationship flourished, not in grand gestures, but in the steady growth of trust. We spent weekends together, exploring new places and talking about everything and nothing. I learned how to love again, not out of fear or desperation, but out of respect for each other's individual journeys. We weren't perfect, but we didn't need to be. I had come to understand that perfection wasn't the goal. The goal was to build a relationship where both of us could be our authentic selves, flaws and all, and still find beauty in the connection we shared. There were still moments of vulnerability. There were days when I would catch myself, wondering if this was just too good to be true, if maybe I was still holding on to past fears. But each time I felt that, I reminded myself of how far I had come. I had already faced the hardest betrayal of my life. If I could survive that, I could certainly survive the inevitable ups and downs of any relationship. I also learned to let go of the need for answers or closure from my ex-wife. It was hard, at first, not to want some kind of explanation from her. Why did she do it? What was going on in her mind? What did she think of me? But the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't the same person who had been blindsided by her actions. I was no longer searching for validation or understanding from her. I had taken control of my own healing, and that was the only closure I needed. I still carried the lessons from my past, but they no longer felt like a heavy burden. They had transformed into wisdom that allowed me to set better boundaries, recognize red flags earlier, and communicate openly and honestly with the people I cared about. I realized that everything I had gone through had shaped me into someone stronger and more self-aware. And that wasn't a bad thing. As the year went on, I found myself thinking about the future with a new sense of optimism. I wasn't running from my past, but I was no longer letting it dictate how I saw the world. I had finally come to terms with the fact that love, trust, and loyalty are all choices that I had made in the past, but now I was making them consciously and with intention. One evening, as my partner and I sat together on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the night sky, she turned to me, her voice soft yet steady. "I know you've been through a lot," she said, "but I want you to know I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I believe in us." In that moment, I knew that she was the kind of person I had been searching for all along. Not someone who would erase my pain, but someone who would walk beside me as I healed. Someone who didn't expect me to be perfect, but who saw the value in the person I had become despite everything I had been through. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. I believed that love could be something genuine, something real, not because of what we had been through, but because we were willing to work through the challenges together. The past would always be a part of me, but it no longer had the power to steal my future. In that quiet, peaceful moment, I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about learning, growing, and choosing to move forward. And I was ready. As time continued to pass, I found myself slowly weaving the threads of my past and present into something that felt whole again. Each day was a small victory. I had made peace with who I was, and even more importantly, I had made peace with what had happened. The anger I once held had melted into a kind of quiet understanding. I realized that, while my ex-wife's betrayal had altered the course of my life, it no longer controlled it. The new relationship I had built with my partner was evolving into something deeper. It wasn't a perfect love, but it was honest and real. We had learned to communicate openly, to express our fears and hopes for the future, without judgment. I no longer saw every disagreement as a potential betrayal. I no longer had to second-guess her intentions. I could trust again, but this time, I was doing it consciously, with the understanding that love takes work and effort from both sides. We moved in together after a year of dating, and as we settled into our shared home, I felt a sense of contentment I hadn't known for a long time. The little things that made up our days, shared morning coffee, planning future trips, laughing at each other's silly jokes, became the foundation of my happiness. There were moments of quiet joy in these ordinary things, and I came to appreciate them in a way I never had before. Occasionally, my ex-wife would still cross my mind. I wondered if she ever thought about me, about what she had done, or about the life she had left behind. But these thoughts were fleeting. They no longer had the same sting they once did. I had rebuilt my sense of self, and I no longer needed answers from her to feel complete. The person I had been when I was with her was no longer who I was now. I had grown, learned, and evolved beyond the man who had once been deceived. I remember one day, after a particularly busy week, my partner and I went on a weekend trip to a small coastal town. The air was salty, the waves crashing rhythmically against the shore. We walked along the beach, hand in hand, letting the sand slip through our toes. In that peaceful moment, I realized how far I had come. I was no longer running from my past. I was embracing the person I had become because of it. At some point during that trip, I found myself thinking about forgiveness, not for her but for me. I had forgiven myself for staying in a relationship that wasn't healthy, for overlooking the signs, for not valuing myself enough to walk away sooner. I had learned to forgive myself for letting my heart be broken. It was the final step in truly healing. Forgiveness wasn't about condoning what had happened. It was about freeing myself from the weight of resentment so I could live fully again. Returning home, I began to take even more steps toward living for myself. I enrolled in a photography class, something I had always wanted to try, but never had the time or confidence to pursue before. I started volunteering at a local charity, helping people who were facing their own struggles. Giving back felt like a way of healing the wounds I'd carried for so long, and it also reminded me of the good in the world, despite everything I'd been through. As the months turned into years, I found myself more at peace with the man I had become. I was no longer defined by my ex-wife's betrayal, nor was I shaped by the scars it left behind. I was building a life that was meaningful, rich with love, purpose, and hope. And with each passing day, I realized that the life I had once feared I had lost was actually the life I was now creating for myself. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it was more than enough. When I look back now, I see how far I've come. I see the strength in the choices I've made, in the lessons learned, and in the love I now have in my life. The past will always be a part of me, but it no longer holds me back. I am no longer the man I was when I walked out of that door years ago, confused and heartbroken. I am someone new, someone who has learned to trust again, to love again, and to live without fear of what might come next. And with that, I know that whatever comes my way, I am ready. Because the greatest thing I have learned through all of this is that no matter what, I always have the power to choose how my story unfolds. And I choose to keep moving forward, with love, with strength, and with an unwavering belief in the future.